we'll be recording the call, and then we'll also be transcribing the call and sharing it on our Appropedia page. So in case you have reached here because the information about the call was shared somewhere else, that's our Appropedia page. And there you will find all the previous recordings and previous conversations that we have had in season 1 of the Open Climate calls. You can follow the agenda and take all the notes that you want in the document that Shannon is sharing there on the side chat, and I'll share again. And feel free to write your introduction, as I said, and also write any other comment or question that you might want to make after Matt finishes his presentation. You can also use the Zoom chat for comments and technical difficulties. Please, of course, mute yourself if you are not speaking. And if you don't want to share your camera, that's a-okay. There's no obligation to be with your camera on all the time. And of course, we also want to acknowledge that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And, you know, everyone is having different challenges. Omicron is on the rise. And we have been having 2 very exhausting years already of the pandemic. So everyone is experiencing this differently. So please be kind to each other and caring about this fact. I'm gonna offer a brief introduction about why these calls. We started these calls back in 2021. And we started doing them because we want to better understand how the open movement can respond meaningful to the climate crisis. And I see a couple of faces from the open movement here already joining us in this call that have also been with us on season 1. And so for doing this, we started like saying, okay, we can reach out to a lot of people who have their own understanding about how the open movement can respond to the climate crisis. And that's how we organized season 1 of Open Climate Calls. And this is our second season. And in this season, we want to steer things up a bit. So if you are interested in facilitating any of the calls, please, to your introduction, add something that says facilitation, or I'm interested in facilitating, or leave us a message so we can contact you after the call. And of course, you can read more about past calls on the wiki link that I just shared on our Appropedia page. And there you will find all the write-ups. You will also find the recordings of previous calls and any other information about who we are, who is this group of people that have been having calls during 2021 about the open and environmental crisis. And for today's call, we're going to have with us Matt Rota. Thanks, Matt, for being here. He's based in New Orleans, and he's the Senior Policy Director at Healthy Gulf, formerly the Gulf Restoration Network, if I'm not, yes, perfectly. And then the conversation today is going to be how are environmental defenders using the Knowledge Commons, and we expect this to be the first call on a series of calls where we can actually talk about more about how environmental defenders are using the Knowledge Commons. And you can find Matt's presentation there. Actually, you can have access to the Google slides. And with that being said, Matt, the floor is all yours.
All right. Hey, thanks. It's a really an honor to kick off season 2 with y'all. Again, my name is Matt Rota, and I am the Senior Policy Director for Healthy Gulf, based in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the United States. And we face we're kind of ground zero here for a lot of climate-based issues in the United States. We deal with a lot of environmental justice issues due to systemic racism and a lot of other things. And so it's great to talk to y'all today, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation afterwards, just to kind of see, get some new ideas on the table from y'all with your expertise in the open data movement. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here, And let's see. And let's present. So there you go. You should have my first slide on my slide deck now. Yeah, so again, my name is Matt Rota, and I work for Healthy Gulf. We're an environmental advocacy organization based in for the Gulf of and we work mainly in the 5 states of the United States in the Gulf of Mexico region. That's Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. And our main goals, well, just to go back a little bit, we were founded in 1994 as a relatively traditional environmental advocacy organization focused on protecting water and wetlands and endangered species. But especially over the past 5 years, we've developed a new strategic plan, and our focus has still uses kind of the same base, but we are focusing a lot more on just transition away from fossil fuels and climate adaptation and climate justice, because we have a lot of we've come to learn that almost every issue that we experience here is an environmental justice issue as well, given the history of the Gulf South in the United States. So this is just a little bit kind of how we break things up as an organization. We're advancing climate justice, conserving Gulf resources, holding industry accountable, and industry generally means the petrochemical and oil and gas industries, which we are just overburdened with here in Louisiana and Texas and the Gulf South. And then protecting clean water, because the Gulf of Mexico, drains over 50% of the continental United States. And it is, not to mention, bordering, I forget how many countries, and it's just a vital resource, but it's also kind of been, it's at the end of the pipe, right? It's at the end of the Mississippi River, and it's where we have a lot of oil and gas drilling, and therefore a lot of oil and gas spills, and highlighted by the BP disaster that happened in 2010, as well as the Taylor leak, which you might not have heard about, which is a leak that is still ongoing. It's almost plugged up, but it's probably the longest going oil leak in the Gulf in the United States ever. It leaked for about 15 years before we could get somebody to step up and actually get it cleaned up. And we discovered that and monitored that through organizations that use open data. That was the organization SkyTruth, that uses satellite data to monitor different environmental impacts throughout the world. And they've been very instrumental in holding Taylor Energy, the folks that are responsible for the leak, to actually finally, a lawsuit around that just finally settled, and it looks like there's going to be more money going towards cleaning it up. And so that's very exciting, because they were fighting the cleanup for about 7-8 years. So we're very excited to see the cleanup phase of that really starting to get going. But that's not exactly what I'm going to talk about today. That's just a little tangent. So what I want to talk today about is just how we you can think of us as the front lines of the in the environmental movement in the United States. And obviously data is really important, and data that's accessible is important, because if we don't have the information, it's pretty impossible to get things cleaned up and to make the Gulf South a better place for everybody to live. And one of the main types of data that we use is aerial imagery, whether it's satellite imagery or overflights that we get through partner organizations. There's an amazing organization here, South Wings, that will take activists and reporters and decision makers up in the air to see things firsthand. And they have a bunch of volunteer pilots and another amazing organization. I'm going to be listing a lot of other organizations as I'm talking, because we don't do this alone. And I do not intend to take credit for any of the amazing work that our partners have done throughout all of this. But this is I'm just going to give a few examples that are kind of hopefully conversation starters and ideas of how we use data and some of the issues that we've run into whenever data hasn't been as open as we would like. First of all, this slide right here, this is a coal export terminal on the lower Mississippi River, about, I don't know, like 30, 40 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. And as you can see in the lower portion there, for years, they were just not cleaning up the coal, and you would have this plume of coal that would just coal dust and petroleum coke dust flowing down the Mississippi River, polluting not only the river, but also some projects that are on the books to actually restore some of our coastal land. And so this coal dust, this petroleum, was getting into some of the coastal restoration projects, and they didn't want to clean it up. We first noticed it on some overflights that we did after the BP disaster, and then we started going through kind of what you always do. You go to Google Earth, right, and you start doing the maps or the time steps on Google Earth, and saw this has been ongoing for a long time. And so our first thing was like, well, let's just we filed suit against them, because there's ways in the US to file citizen suits against companies that are not obeying the Clean Water Act. And so we filed suit. And as we were putting that case together, we had a lot of trouble getting those images. I don't know if any of you all have tried to get some imagery from Google, but holy cow, it's hard to get that information from them. And we ended up, I think we got a couple images from them after several months of trying to, we could give them the exact date and all that. And Google Earth does have where they get their imagery, but it's still very difficult, and proprietary stuff, and a lot of times the images are not from public sources. So we ended up having to do a lot of our own aerial photographs. And so we flew over this site quite a bit. We actually took a kind of a precarious canoe and a kayak out into the Mississippi River to grab some samples. We flew a kite and balloon over the facility with cameras attached, thanks to some of the technology from the organization Public Lab. And with all that information, it was a success, right? This is right here is where that plume was. And you can also see along this dock that you can actually see some gray, which is the concrete, and not just covered in black. And so utilizing this information, this data, we were actually able to come to a settlement with them to get this cleaned up. And then they also, part of the settlement was to give money to some coastal restoration and tree preservation nearby. So this was an exciting thing, and it was all but it was a rough start, because we noticed the problem with noticed the problem on Google Earth a lot, but we had to collect all our own data, even though a lot of the data actually existed, but just was not in an accessible format. Another example is in the Gulf of Mexico states, the 5 states. Each state administers its own water laws based on the Clean Water Act. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, delegates that responsibility to each of the states. in the federalist system that we have. And so that means they have a lot of leeway in how they implement these laws. And one of the issues that we've run into is the dismissal of publicly gathered data, that you have organizations that do a lot of data collection on water quality measurements, and those are very often not accepted by the states because it's even if they use good quality assurance protocols, even if they use ones that are based on EPA guidelines, a lot of times they aren't accepted. They will take them as sometimes as advisement and maybe look at the water body that you're identifying all of the pollution issues in, but these citizen groups are the data that they gather is often not incorporated into state data because it's citizen data. And we several years ago, we took a look a little closer at this, and we graded on an A to F scale based on the data the information that we collected of how they allow public participation. And for these purposes, I'm going to be focusing on the volunteer monitoring. And as you can see, that's Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. That's basically going from east to west. They did not do very well. Florida doesn't even accept public data if it's gathered at an EPA standard. They actually don't even accept some EPA data because they have their own way of doing things, and that's a method to avoid admitting to pollution problems. But as you can see, each of the states on the metrics that we use, and I can share this report in the notes after our call today. If I don't think I linked to it yet. So we saw that they aren't accepting this data, even though there are people that are putting the hours out there, that it's not being well incorporated into the process that the state already has, which could alleviate staffing issues and things like that if they actually accepted data that was collected by citizen scientists and community scientists. And now the last thing I want to and these are all just kinds of conversation starters to talk about the different ways that I'm trying to just figure out how the open data movement and the open climate movement could interface with some of the things that we're seeing on the ground here. And this is another thing that I am going to talk about that I didn't do most of it. This was but it's an amazing tool and an amazing visualization that I think should be utilized a lot more. And the states and the feds are not going to be doing it anytime soon. And so it's going to be falling to us. And visualization, data visualization is so important in the work that we do on the front lines, because you can spout out numbers and not everybody really understands the issue. But if you can get that visualized on a map or some sort of graphic, that can be a lot more impactful. It can not only bring more people into the movement by realizing the impacts that they're experiencing and some of the causes of the illnesses and environmental impacts that they're witnessing, but also this is a way to move public policy as well, in that if you can visualize it, then even somebody at a legislature, state legislature, or Congress can start understanding these things. And that's how some of the things that we need you to keep the climate justice movement moving forward and moving in the direction that it is currently moving, hopefully. So one of my favorite visualizations that I've seen in the past couple years came out of the Forensic Architecture Group, and you should go to their website, forensic-architecture.org, and they've done some really cool stuff throughout the world. It's not just they're based in London, but one of the people that has worked there is Amani Brown, who used to live in Louisiana. She is in the UK now, but using some available data, she was able to do some fluvial modeling and represent that graphically, which is really, really impactful. So I want to kind of share that with you just real fast. There you go. So this area that is being considered is the area known as Cancer Alley. It's the area between Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and basically the Gulf. And it is chock full of industrial pollution. It has ethylene crackers, it has petrochemical development, it has fertilizer manufacturers, it has radioactive phosphate and phosphogypsum dumps. It has all different kinds of pollution, particulates to radioactivity and everything in between. And this is also an area that is majority African American, and there's a history of environmental racism in this area. So it's down there on the bottom of Mississippi, just to give a little bit of an idea. Here, and y'all can see my little pointer, right? If not, at the bottom, you have basically New Orleans, and to the top left is Baton Rouge. And these are all discharge locations of chemical facilities throughout Cancer Alley. So just so many. And this itself is impactful, right? You can see the density of all of this. But what the other folks did at Forensic Architecture is even cooler. Now I'm gonna show you that now. So they have this video that shows Cancer Alley, and they actually mapped out all of the different places where these different pollutants are let out into the air, from chloroplene to ethylene oxide. And then they put in a fluvial model to show where that pollution was going. And this, to me, is, I feel like this should be the future of whenever we're looking at environmental impacts, because this shows you where the pollution is going. It also shows you how much it changes, because one of the problems that we have is that we announce, like we say, hey, there is a flare at this petrochemical facility, or people are having trouble breathing. And by the time one of the environmental agencies comes out, the winds have shifted or other things, so they don't actually detect that pollution that is causing people to have asthma attacks and having other respiratory issues, and just increasing their pollution load and their cancer causing load and all of these other things. And so, but to me, this visualization just is so important, and really shows all the different impacts in real time, and can show like how everybody in this area is impacted. So I'm not going to show this whole video, but that is, as you can see, just, to me, this is just some amazing visualization of environmental data that can have a real impact. So I'm going to get back to my presentation here. So again, I want to say that, this is not all stuff that we at Healthy Gulf have done. We were basically trying to help communities fight a lot of these sources of pollution, whether they're new or existing. We have had some amazing successes recently, delaying or hopefully fully fighting off one of the largest plastic plants that was proposed in the world that they wanted to put down there for most of plastics. They want to put right in the middle of Cancer Alley, and other issues as well. But I think the more information we have, and the more information the communities have in a format that they can understand and then share with other decision makers, is really a vital piece of the whole movement of environmental justice and climate justice in the Gulf South and in the world. So with that, I don't know if Scan, you want to do any questions, or if you want to just jump into some questions, but I got together with a couple folks and developed some of these questions as conversation starters for when we break up into smaller groups, but I'll kind of go through them real quickly. Is how can the open movement help the environmental and just transition movements? So kind of like the very broad, like how do you think the open movement could help? What are some strategies that get governmental agencies to accept community data and citizen data, like I talked about, them not accepting environmental monitoring data very well? What could be done to make environmental data more open and accessible, from whether it's public policy, community, whatever, kind of going off of that problem we had with the Google Earth and Google and getting information from some of these less than open communities. And then how do we best communicate synthesized data from open and governmental sources to communities impacted by pollution? And that kind of gets to my last couple of slides of, what resources does the open community have to help with some of these data visualizations, and so communicating visually the impact of some of this pollution that we're seeing in the Gulf South and throughout the world. So with that, Scan, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, well, first, thanks, Matt, for all this information and for your wonderful presentation. I think you've really helped us set up the stage and the scene for having meaningful conversation, I hope, in breakout rooms. I don't know if anyone has a question that they would like to ask Matt. This is the moment to do so. So if anyone has a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah, I see Karien. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Hi, Karin. It's okay. Everybody does it. I am curious about, so I really like the way that you described the way that you had to go about getting the data. One of my questions is, how did you decide? And I mean, I've got my own ideas about it, but I'm particularly interested in your journey around, instead of fighting for the data that already exists, going down the citizen science and observation route. Tell me a little bit about that decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to, like, for the specifics of the UBT coal pollution issue, is that, well, there were a couple things. One, it just ended up being easier, which is just depressing, to like get planes and fly over, but it's also because we had an infrastructure to do it. If we didn't have partner organizations like Public Lab to help with the kite mapping, and if we didn't have organizations like South Wings to provide free or low-cost flights over these areas, it would not have been possible. And I don't know, it would have been a much more difficult thing to fix, because probably if you aren't taking into consideration, if we had to pay for all the flights, we're talking $500 to $1,000 a pop, probably, to fly over those, maybe closer to 1,500 sometimes, depending on the time. That would have been cost prohibitive for us. And getting out in the Mississippi River to get grab samples is also good, but that kind of data can also be shrugged off with by the agencies saying, oh, well, how can you prove that it's from this particular coal plant? Because we have a lot of coal plants that are dumping coal into the river. And so, And so it starts getting more and more expensive to like saying there's coal in the river to there is coal from this particular plant, this particular pile of coal, you know, and getting, you know, identifying that specific kind of coal, given that they get coal from everywhere. And petroleum coke, we don't forget about that.
So that is really interesting, is having some sort of corresponding data. So you're having one data set is one thing, but having something that corresponds and can be tracked in that way is something else, which isn't something that I guess exists even with the base data sources. That is super interesting.
Mm-hmm. And we did use the Google Earth in communications, like, right? So we weren't able to use it legally, or very little of it we're able to use in our legal filings, but we were, you know, but it still is a good tool. Like if you want to show the time steps of the pollution, showing it is there for public communications, or even in communications with public officials, that is still extremely useful. But you know, it kind of shows the breakdown of when you all of a sudden you can't use that data that everybody knows is just right there.
Can I also ask a question?
Let's go with Jonathan first, who wrote his one in the chat,
Sure.
and then we'll take yours, and then we'll go to the breakout rooms after that if everyone agrees. So Jonathan is asking, I wonder also about the quality of the data. If all sources were accepted to allow citizen scientists to monitor corporate pollution, wouldn't that also allow corporations to spam the open data with questionable data? A related problem. Suppose the petrochemical industry paid Google to filter Google Earth images in certain ways.
Yeah, I'm going to take those in reverse order. With the petrochemical industry paid, if they could pay Google to scrub those things, yeah. I mean, I don't, and that's one of the problems that we run into with you know, this privately owned or data, or just privately or selectively produced data, that I don't think that there's necessarily anything stopping that from happening. And I mean, I don't even know if that would be, if there would be even any legal issue, you know, actual legal issues with that, from that happening. So that's, I mean, at this point, you know, for all of Google's, you know, farming, you know, their business of farming all of our personal data for profit, you know, that they still have some people, good people working for them in their mapping departments and things like that. But I mean, yeah, that could easily happen and we wouldn't know about it. And then with the first question of the quality of data, is that a lot of these organizations that are, you know, that like the Citizen River Watch and things like that, they use protocols. They, you know, are following, because in order to get their data analyzed, they need to follow the specifics of the lab that they're sending, and a lot of them follow the EPA protocols of, you know, doing double samples and lots of other things. And so, yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating for just like, hey, here's some data that I collected, but having the data with the paper trail that shows that you followed a protocol. It's still not foolproof, right? Because you could collect it from one place and say you collected it from another place and all that. And so it isn't foolproof, but I feel like that can be, you know, as long as you have a process, or you can show that you used a process, that I think it's, I think that's avoidable.
Great. Ivan, do you want to go ahead?
Yes,
and
yes.
Before your
Yeah.
question, sorry.
Okay.
As more, for those of you in the intro who have left their names, if you want to be contacted for future calls, if you could also please leave your email there, so it's easier for us to send you a reminder before we have our call. Thank you. Ivan, go ahead.
Oh yes, I basically put this question into the chat. So thank you very much. Very good presentation, very inspiring, and you're very successful. It's really good. but it seems that you're experiencing some difficulties with access to information, like these visuals that you've been trying to get. You had to invest so much time and effort into getting that. And I think that climate activism gives new power to the movement for open access and to getting the access to information. So do you think we could have some kind of policy put together? Do you think, do you have any ideas on what we actually should go for when we aim to improve this regime of access? Like, should we press governments, or should we press NASA, or should we press Google, or should we press Elon Musk, or whoever has access to satellites and pictures, so that they would grant access to full access to all the areas, or whatever, you know? Maybe you have some ideas. Should we approach scientific publishers or whoever else to ask them to make specific works, or a sector of works available to open access? Like, what will help you out with what you're doing, and how can we fix that?
Yeah, I guess there two things about that. One is there is a lot of data out there. You know, in the States, the Department of Agriculture does the aerial surveys. Different states do aerial surveys. Different like NASA does aerial and satellite surveys, and all of that. A lot of that data is theoretically public data, right? You know, if it's gathered by in the United States, if it's gathered by a federal agency
it's
or a state
domain.
agency, it's public domain, but accessing it can be very difficult, and navigating that. And I don't know.
A special kind of protocol, maybe.
Yeah, and I think that's where one place where the open movement and programmers might be able to, you know, assist in some of that, because I'll give a quick example. Another thing we do is the United States Corps of Engineers is in charge of giving permits to destroy wetlands in the U.S. And they put out public notices that, hey, we're going to give or we're thinking about giving a permit to somebody who's going to, you know, fill in these wetlands. And we worked with somebody to develop a scraper to get all of those permits and just put it in a spreadsheet to let us know like how many acres are being proposed and all that. And that's really useful, and it still is kind of useful. But then the Corps of Engineers went and changed all their websites. And all of a sudden our scraper was, you know, not worth it. And, you know, our developer was volunteer and then part-time, and like he worked on it over a series of years. And so the code, and I'm not a coder, but the code was apparently really messy. And so like getting back in.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a hot topic, and we could maybe approach somebody in the federal government so that they would design some kind of guidelines on access to urgently needed information for the benefit, you know, of the climate movement, whatever. I think Biden administration is prone to do that. So
I think so too. It's an excellent point. Yeah, and kind of like, I feel like you know, there's three avenues which all have potential. One is just, you know, getting the Biden administration to make an executive orders, you know, basically saying this should be accessible and in this way. And then there's, which, you know, and he's done some executive orders about, you know, public information should be public. You know, and the agencies fight that to a certain extent, depending on their lawyers. But then there's, you know, working with like a particular agency, like EPA already has, they have some really good tools as far as their environmental justice and some mapping stuff. And so there could be also, and pushing them to take that platform they already have and giving them, it's like, hey, could you incorporate this data? Hey, could you incorporate this data? Just seeing if they just would do it, which certainly can happen. And then there's the legislative side of things. Of like, if we want to keep it that way, then we need to do something legislatively, because, you know, agencies and executive orders are at the whim of the, you know, the president to a large extent. And so that's the kind of the longer haul, but the thing that would make things more permanent, I guess I would say. Not permanent, but more long lasting.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mar, and Ivan for your questions, and everyone else for their questions. So now we're gonna go to free breakout groups, I guess. Shannon, how many? 3? Yeah, great. So we'll go to free breakout rooms, and the idea is that we have the prompts that Matt included in his last live show, and we're gonna have those questions, and the idea is that we're gonna have around 3 to 5 minutes to answer them silently, and then have a small group discussion, and then we'll come back to the main room for closing out the call. And if we have some time, we'll address the question that Carol did there on the chat. So with that being said, expect to be taken to a breakout room.
Okay, yes, we're going to fly away. Scan, how long do you want them open for?
10 minutes, right?
10 minutes. Okay. So see everybody back in 10 minutes. And there's a room on the document because we can't record this part of the call. So if somebody could please make sure to take good notes, that would be greatly appreciated. Engaged.
No, not really. Okay. Good.
Thanks so much for your talk, Matt. I'm gonna follow up with you afterwards. I want to send you some stuff that I've been working on.
Cool. Yeah. And one thing that we're just talking with Ivan about was that getting that list together of all the thing, getting that wish list together, we don't have it. And it's not just us, so that's,
Yeah.
I think that's a good action.
If we could, the way we work on these documents, if you could just publish a Google Documents with the list of issues and stuff you think we should go for based on your experience, other people could maybe complement it. Because what I'm doing, for example, I'm aggregating the scientific articles indexed by Web of Science on climate change and put them in one place, and they're all in Creative Commons. I have already 77,000. And which is people should be doing stuff like this in their sectors. Maybe somebody could aggregate visualizations for specific sites. If we mark specific sites on the map we're interested in, maybe we could do the monitoring by other means, but without bothering the pilots. Although I understand that you have quite a group of brave people.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Welcome back. It sounds like from the drop-ins that I had, really good conversations had. So I'm going to pass it back to Scan and Matt to wrap us up in our last few minutes. You're muted, Scan. Scan. Okay. It looks like Scan's audio is not working. We have 2 minutes, so we're on the verge of needing to end our call. Any quick report outs, and then just a reminder to everybody, please, if you'd like to come to future calls, leave your email in the document. We will be doing the next call probably the 3rd or 4th week of February. It'll be on another exciting topic. There's also lots of follow-up to happen amongst the group, it sounds like, so we want to make sure everybody can stay in contact. And yeah, any last comments, thoughts in the 2 minutes that we have before we end?
Well, if only I could stress once more the need for collective action around some kind of collective agenda based on access, so that we could put together some list of demands that should be, we need like something we should be fighting for. So we need something like very practical. Because I think we have a unique opening with, at least in the US and in Europe, I think everywhere, well, almost everywhere, we have a unique opening with the administration. People are trying, they're not ready to do anything, but at least they're ready to give access to information, which is kind of palliative measures. It doesn't get them into a fight as much as doing something. So they should be very willing to come forward and do something, as long as we can put together the list. So thank you. Thank you.
All right. No final comments. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all so much. We look forward to having you on future calls. And again, if you would like to facilitate or suggest a topic for another one, please get in touch with Scan. Leave your email address on the Google Doc. We will have the recording up on Appropedia soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.